record on this computer. Okay, so I want to talk about a couple things. The main purpose of this is just to give everybody an update on where we are, what our plans are, what we know and what we don't know. We continue to try to oops, sorry, Zoom's all screwed up. So to set some initial context, in the last kind of big email that I sent out, I talked about 3 phases and used the language of the blizzard, winter, and ice age being phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. Phase 1 being the phase that we are still in, meaning that we're doing kind of online stuff only. We're doing no in-person gatherings of any kind. And so that's where we still are. Phase 2 is where some in-person gatherings will be allowed with certain restrictions in place, such as social distancing, mask wearing, and certain limits on the number of people we're allowed to have in different places, and then other things that we know or don't know at this time. The third phase is when we have a vaccine and we no longer have to be afraid of the spread of COVID. So there's a long distance, most likely, between the the second phase and the third phase. And the second phase is probably going to have kind of A, B, and C elements to it. It's probably going to change and evolve as we walk through it, as infection rates decline, as advice from our bishops and the CDC change, et cetera, et cetera. We had some really fascinating, the first thing I'm gonna do is share with you some results from the survey that we took. We had a lot of really fascinating stuff come out of that. We had over 200 people take the survey, which is at least double what I thought we'd get. I mean, all my colleagues and I have been talking about these types of things, and churches double our size didn't get half that participation. So that means we have some really reliable data. So I'm going to show you first. So I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to show you a few things. Is it so that you can still see me, or can you only see my screen here? Of course, I'm asking questions that nobody can answer. Just give me 1 second. Disable. You can see me. Okay, cool. Thanks all. So we got some interesting feedback on the first phase. Some of the stuff we're doing already. Oh, I need to move my thing. There we go. About, good Lord, Zach, this is awful. So 60% of our people have been participating in online worship most of the time. Another 20% have done it 3 or 4 times. There's 10% of people that have not participated at all. If you participated in online worship, have you or your members or members of your family used portions of the St. Mark's at Home packet? About half of our people are only tuning in for the stream. About another 40% of people are using it or using it occasionally. So today's had a bunch of really great stuff. I hope you all have a chance to look at later. About 43% of our people have tried morning prayer at least once. If you haven't tried morning prayer yet, I encourage you to jump in. We are changing it slightly. We're going to stop doing it on Saturdays. We're going to do it just Monday through Friday, still at 8:30. And any given morning, we still have, I don't know, anywhere between kind of 12, 15, 18 people who are getting together on Zoom to say morning prayer. Anyways, all that to say, lots of people are being involved in lots of stuff, and all that's pretty encouraging. Interesting things about phase 2. These are things that are helpful to us as we plan for moving into phase 2. So we're about split right in half. About 50% of our congregation understands themselves to be in populations the CDC determines are more vulnerable to risk for high health or for serious health issues if they contract COVID. So 50% of our people figure out. Interestingly, our highest demographic, about 40% of our people are over 65. The second biggest demographic at 32% is kids. 32% of our congregation is under the age, are teenagers or younger. But one of the interesting things about those two slides combined is that about 42% of our congregation are over the age of 65, and 50% of our congregation understands themselves to be in vulnerable populations. That means there's another 8 to 10% who are vulnerable for other reasons other than age. When we're able to meet both of the criteria being, in order to move from phase 1 to phase 2, that we have a 2-week period of sustained decline in infection rates. And the second criteria being that our regional bishop has personally certified our regathering plan, which is their effort to make sure that we can comply with all the CDC recommendations for hosting in-person services. So when we're able to meet those criteria, 35% of people say they're likely, 38% say they're somewhat likely, only 27% say they are unlikely. If I attend in-person worship, 37%, almost 40% would prefer a Eucharistic service. 32% plan to just stick to online options for the foreseeable future. Only 12% would prefer a non-Eucharistic service, kind of like we're doing through the stream right now. And 20% have no preference. I'm sorry, I make that beep every time. The question got cut off, but the question here is: the protection of vulnerable populations will remain a high priority until a vaccine is developed. Therefore, even as St. Mark's opens for small gatherings, virtual opportunities for worship will remain. So how likely are you to continue to participate in virtual worship in phase 2, even as we're able to regather? This was a really telling number to me. Almost everybody plans to continue. So that's almost 80% of people plan to continue, are likely or very likely to continue to attend virtual worship. And then another 16% that just don't know. Almost nobody plans to stop. So let me stop there for a second and tell you what, oh my gosh. Of course, me sharing my screen meant that several people were waiting to get into the meeting. Shame. I need like a tech assistant is what I need. Okay, everybody who's just coming in, I apologize, but you can catch up on that last little bit I'm recording. So first, let me say something about timing, because lots of the questions that came in were about that. Yes, thank you. How do I disable? Oh yes, disable the waiting room. Thank you, Jennifer. When are we going to do this? When are we going to transition from phase 1 to phase 2? The answer is we don't have any idea, and probably not very soon. We are not at this point looking to the state of Texas as who can tell us when we can meet again. For the state of Texas to say churches have never been closed. And that's actually right. I mean, that's what we want the state of Texas to say. We don't want the state telling the church what they can and can't do about anything. So that's a good thing, even if like public health wise, that's not good advice. But I'll just say we're not necessarily waiting for some word from the state of Texas, and we're interested in paying attention to what lots of like local authorities and like local civic kind of guidance is. But our principal, the principal body that we're choosing to help us determine when we're going to be able to open is the CDC and our bishops in conversation with health officials. So while we know that many churches in Austin have already returned to public worship in various ways, we're not we don't feel like it would be a responsible choice to do that at this point, and we're still seeing increased infection rates in Travis County. Just last week we had our yet another like new highest day ever in Travis County. So I mean, and especially since Texas has been more aggressive than many other states in opening lots of things, we're going to get lots more data very soon about whether the consequences of those decisions. So we're always at least 2 weeks away, but there is an Episcopal church in Austin who is making plans to reopen the last Sunday of June, and I don't think that's going to happen. So with regard to timing, we just don't really know. But the next thing to say connected to that is that because of, in response to some of those survey results, even when we go back to phase 2, even when we're able to gather in any kind, our plan is to maintain the 10 a.m. hour on Sundays for a virtual service. So we're going to keep that pretty much the same as we've been doing, even as we're able to gather, which means that our principal service, our main service, is going to continue to be that service. If 50% of our congregation is in vulnerable populations for COVID, I just don't feel good as a pastor saying like, okay, guys, we can come back, when really like public health advice for half of our people is actually you should stay home. And so as some of us are able to regather, those are going to be for minor kind of services, because the one place that the most of us are able to safely gather throughout phase 2 is going to still be the virtual space. So we're going to continue to do that, and we're going to continue to, I mean, I don't want to guarantee that it's going to stay at 10 a.m. Making any kind of guarantees about anything these days just feels foolish, but we plan to maintain a prime Sunday slot for that service. And even as people are able to gather again, like, we're going to still do that service with no people, just the people who are required to record the service, because actually one of the things I'll talk about in a second, singing is a very bad idea, especially inside. And so we actually can continue to sing and have soloists and that kind of thing if we're recording them and there's only 3 or 4 of us there. So virtual service, prime hour Sunday AM will continue to be the main service. The other kind of survey things, 80% of the people said that they were likely to continue to do the virtual bits. So the next thing that means is that as we're able to regather, whenever that happens, those services are going to be very short. They're going to be Eucharistic, and they're going to be scattered throughout the week, probably. We don't know exactly like what a proposed schedule will be. But if we're maintaining the virtual service as the principal service, where we're continuing to do a kind of abbreviated ministry of the word kind of service, that's going to be where the kind of main sermon is. And the other smaller services are all going to be probably 25-minute services, and they're just going to be Eucharist. There's probably going to be no sermon, maybe a 2-minute kind of Wednesday night style homily of some kind. But the priority is, for me, that they be Eucharistic, and for public health reasons, that they be as short as possible. As many of us have seen, a lot more research has come out, and all religious services are deemed high-risk activities for the spread of COVID. And so Al McKinney and David Johns have already, for the last week or two, been working on preparing our meditation trail chapel, just to spruce it up a little bit, to spread the benches out a little bit so that they can all be 6 feet apart. So at least one of those services during the week is going to be outside. I know many of us have longed to have some kind of organized worship out there. Now, that's not perfect. It's not a very accessible space. It's not ADA accessible, certainly. Also, it's going to be hot as the frickin' Dickens. So that service is going to be at 5:30 a.m. for anybody who wants to join. I don't know about that. But we could very much be looking at something that we have anywhere from maybe starting with 2, maybe growing to 5 or 6 kind of those services that are scattered throughout the week. One maybe early Sunday, one maybe Sunday evening, one maybe Tuesday at noon, and one maybe Wednesday evening. It's going to look something like that. We're also, for those services, probably going to require people to register in advance. I find that to be a theologically repugnant concept, but here we are. The reason that's important is that one thing we certainly expect is that we'll be limited numbers-wise for what's allowed, and we don't want everybody to show up at once and then have to turn people away. It helps us plan, but also, and the more important reason is for the purposes of contact tracing. So if somebody in our congregation does contract COVID, they will undergo a contact tracing exercise, and they will say, well, I went to St. Mark's Sunday at 5 a.m. and these other 6 people were there, and they can turn to us and I will be able to hand them a list of who everybody was there so they can then quarantine for 14 days and all that. So it's really about community health and protection. Which means that we'll probably ask for RSVPs. We'll probably make that as easy as possible, just signing up on the homepage of the website or something like that. We'll probably cap those RSVPs at around 80-85% of what we think our capacity will be, so that we always do have space for people who show up unannounced. And those people will also have to sign in, so that we have their information, their phone numbers at least, so that we can contact them if necessary. People will be required to wear masks and maintain social distancing inside or outside. And also, like I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of research now that suggests that singing, particularly singing indoors, particularly singing in groups, is a super bad idea, which means that well, one thing I feel comfortable saying is that means we're not going to be singing inside very soon, probably in phase 2, probably throughout phase 2, unless the research changes and starts to suggest something different. That doesn't mean to me necessarily that we can't find ways to sing outside. I don't know. I mean, part of what we've been doing and part of what we'll continue to do throughout phase 2 is continue to kind of experiment and try to figure out what works and what doesn't, and stuff like that. For example, I mean, Casey and I have just not been able to figure out children's ministry since this whole thing started. It's been really, really hard. And we've tried 17 different things and none of them seemed like they were working. And, the first Sunday we had 120 people watch the Godly Play videos. And then the next week we had 15, and the next week we had 2, and then all of a sudden Casey's had this idea for this summer kids club thing, and we had like 50 families sign up for it. And it's been amazing. So we're going to continue at that same principle. I think applies for us as we kind of experiment in phase 2 and trying to figure out what works and what doesn't work. There's a couple of questions that people asked about phase 2. Specifically, people were wondering if we're going to not allow people who are over 65 to come. The answer to that is no. Anybody is allowed to come. This is church. you're allowed to come. That said, we're I feel like it's my responsibility and and just sensible to not incentivize people who are in vulnerable populations to come, which is why we're going to continue to make the virtual services the main services. We don't want to be saying to those people who are, according to public health advice, actively being discouraged from going out in public, and particularly going to religious services, all right, we can regather, so we're going to move on without you. That's not what we're going to do. There's been some conversation about whether or not we wanted to like demarcate one of those weekly services to be specifically for people who are in vulnerable populations. And I'm open to being persuaded about that, but I'm not yet comfortable with that idea. And the reason why is precisely because of the kind of incentive stuff that I was just talking about. Like, I don't want to be sending mixed messages from what the CDC is saying. I don't want to say, this service is safe for you to come to, because it's not. The truth is that anytime you leave your house right now, you are putting yourself at a greater risk than if you stayed in your house. And anytime you're leaving your house to go into another indoor space with other people, you're putting yourself at even greater risk. Now, we have a whole series of really intense cleaning and disinfecting protocols that we're now already following just because of the 4 or 5 of us that are in the building once a week. And the expectation is that we will have to thoroughly and deeply clean and disinfect any space that people were in anytime that they're in them, between any time that they're going to be in them. So we can't really, even if we wanted to, go back to a in-person services at 8, 9, and 11. We need time to clean everything in between all those things. So while we will be making every effort to say we tried to make this as safe as possible, we're not saying it's safe to come to church. We're not going to turn anybody away at the door. We're not going to do that. We will strongly suggest that people who don't have masks not come inside. I think probably we're not going to let anybody without a mask inside. That just means that, I don't know, the Forest Boys are going to have to be ushers every week. They're the only ones scary enough, I think. Anyways, people are going to have to wear masks. I'm going to stop talking now. I wanted to end by saying, I want to end by saying one thing about stewardship and then take some other questions. So one of the questions in the survey was, this is a time of economic uncertainty, blah, blah, blah. Our vestry is working to be prepared. How do you anticipate your giving being affected at St. Mark's? So let me show you what that was. 67%, oh wait, you can't see it. I'll just tell you. 67% of people said that their giving would remain unchanged. 67% unchanged. 16% of people said that their giving will go up. 13% of people said that they would prefer not to answer. Fair enough. Less than 5% of people said that their giving would go down. I just want you to sit with that for a second. Now let me say something about that. The first reaction, I think, is, and certainly was for me, like, wow, we are lucky. We are very blessed, and as I've had, friends, and we've all had friends and seen the numbers on the news about the fact that this is going to wreck our economy. Um, and so we are very fortunate indeed. And also, I mean, it's fair to say we also don't know. We don't know what's going to happen, and so all those numbers could continue to change, and we know that. And I think one response to that could be, since we are so fortunate, we're so fortunate, therefore we don't have to make the same kinds of sacrifices that other people in the world are being required to make right now. Other churches in zip codes right next door to us are being required to make. And I think that's the wrong decision. What I and the vestry have been talking about instead is that what we read that to mean is that because we are fortunate and blessed as we are to have, for the most part, now I know there's some people in our community have been drastically negatively affected by this, but for the most part, our bottom line, at least right now, doesn't look like it's going to change all that much. That means that we have a responsibility to be more generous than we've ever been before. And that's the kind of tone that I and the vestry have tried to set from the beginning. We've already given, I think, $7,000 or so away, which is not really in our budget to do. And we're planning on giving away at least double that already between now and the end of the year. It also means that, me and the vestry are looking at our budget and saying, like, well, what other money aren't we going to be spending this year, and how can we funnel that over towards organizations that are working on the front lines of this crisis. And so it feels important for you to hear me say that we're going to sacrifice and adapt to this new reality. We're going to emerge out of phase 2 someday into phase 3, into something that looks different than what we were used to before all this started. And I feel like it's our responsibility to adapt to what that's going to look like as soon as we possibly can, so that we can allocate resources towards places that are going to do the most good and that are going to sustain our parish for a long time, for its long-term health. So I just don't want us to be in a, okay, we're lucky, so like batten down the hatches kind of mentality. I want us to be in a, aren't we lucky, so probably we should be giving a lot of it away. So that's my speech about that. I can't tell you how difficult it is to be speaking into a vacuum and have no sense if people are like, yes, or people are like, I hate this guy. It's really hard. All right. Anyways, I will talk to my therapist about it, not a wall full of Zoom faces. How about that? Cool. Okay. I'm going to see if there's a couple questions in the chat. If you have questions, send them to me now. Would you be willing to do morning prayer at 7 a.m. one morning a week? Yes. I know morning prayer is at a time that some of us are already working. I don't know. I'll think about that. Let me think about doing it at a different time one morning a week. Let me think about it. Let me look back over as you guys write any other questions you might have. Let me look back over to the original list of questions here. Yeah, I covered most of these. Yeah, no, I covered all of them. Yes, stewardship report is very positive. Hang in there, Zach. Yeah, thanks, Heather. Yes, yes. Yes. Another big thing about our stewardship, I mean, we altered part of our budget this year to designate a good amount of money to throwing another block party, which we're obviously not going to be doing this year. Um, and so that's freed up even more money for us to give away. Um, we're trying to balance our giving strategy right now between kind of existing partnerships that we have uh, with organizations like El Buen, Trinity Center, Community First, who are all just uh, yeah, are all extremely on the front lines right now, and have kind of a past, organizations that we know will most likely still be here, on the other side of this crisis. And then also trying to give to kind of locally springing up funds that have sprung up in direct response to the COVID crisis stuff, um, and and not really giving anything so far to kind of national organizations. We feel pretty good about that. Block party money, definitely. Yeah, it's definitely good. Yeah, that decision's already been made about the block party money. Uh, um, yeah, and that's advice that our bishops have given us to, or at least echoed, especially in times of kind of acute crisis. Giving locally is the kind of best bang for your buck, and that kind of thing. I think especially as we're unable to kind of, go and shovel stuff or whatever it is, we're used to helping in concrete ways. We right now the best thing we can do is continue to give money. Uh, okay, agree with the local approach. Yeah, good, good, good. I do think that one other thing about the short Eucharistic in-person services that we may or may have, we're unsure at this point whether or not those services they will be Eucharistic. Like, we're going to celebrate the Eucharist at them. I'm committed to that. But we're not sure whether or not we're going to be able to distribute communion of any kind at that time. They could be in-person gatherings where we continue to pray the prayer of spiritual communion like we did last Sunday together, which is weird. I know it's weird. It's dumb, and it's not ideal. But uh, but I wrote an article about why it's important to do it. So if anybody wants to read that, they can. Is there a way of people? Yeah, no. Heather's asking, is there a way of people brought their own bread and wine that you could do a global blessing? A global blessing would really be quite something. Just hold the hands up and. Yeah, it's. So the rubrics say the celebrant must touch the bread. And the reason for that, I mean, that's the rubric. I'll post the link to the article in the chat. How about that? The reason for that's the rubric that's also kept us from you guys holding up bread to the Zoom screen and me going like this. Because being in person matters. Now, that's different, what you're talking about, Heather, because we are together in person, and that's part of the point. Maybe there is some room for something like that, but stuff like that is really up to the bishop and not me. They would have to authorize us specifically to do that kind of thing. But even in extraordinary circumstances, yeah, I mean, the extraordinary circumstances that the pivot that we're allowed to make in extraordinary circumstances is precisely the prayer for spiritual communion. That's it. And there's meaning behind. There's lots of theological blood that's been spilled on behalf of that rubric, I'm afraid. Okay, any other questions? I thought Casey crushed it today. If you want to give him a note of encouragement, or if you thought he was terrible, you should tell him why. I don't know. It's important. We like feedback. Yes, Kathy did an amazing job as well. Yeah, attendance was booming today, despite my technological failures. Okay, cool. Well, was the sound really better? Interesting. We're using this other tiny camera that we're kind of experimenting with today. That's interesting to know. Yeah, we do have quite a college of preachers. I agree with that. Okay, I'm going to put the article, a link to my article in the chat for those of you who are. Casey has enjoyed and benefited from your preaching. Well, isn't that the truth? Yeah, I think that's probably true. Oh, we're all going crazy. It's like you guys just get to watch me do it. That's the difference. But if nothing else, I'm gonna have a ponytail at the end of this, and that's something I've always wanted. So. Well, yeah, Michael Meggs is working on a ponytail. I see too. Yeah, it's looking good. Looking good. Okay. Much love, everybody. It's great to see your faces. I'm gonna take a little screenshot of everybody because this is the biggest one that we've done so far. There's one. Pamela Johns, are you in the? You look like you're in the Grand Tetons. That is, man. Is that the Tetons? Really? Thumbs up? Yeah. Yeah. Look at me. This whole thing is the priests and the camera. It's just one big vanity project. It's terrible. Stupid. I should really stop recording.